actually what you is University.
Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil.
She's here from Brazil
Yeah.
as a visiting Fulbright scholar, and you're working with the School of Public Health, is it?
Yeah, in the Environmental Sciences Division. I'm looking at PFAS in an urban lake we have in my town, so the occurrence of PFAS.
Yeah. And so she has a history here. She actually was at the University of Minnesota for a while as an undergrad, about 10 years ago. We were talking about that. And since that time, she's maintained a very collegial relationship with Jim Perry, who actually invited her to speak here. But Jim is in South India on sabbatical right now, so he's not here to introduce her today, unfortunately. But today, Maria is going to talk about her work. These are fairly recent dam ruptures that happened in Brazil, and their role, I guess, the ecotoxicology. So your role in this now, ecotoxicology is being used to develop a mitigation plan.
Actually to assess impacts for these disasters.
Well, with that, I'll allow you to take it away.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Clara Starling. I'm a professor at the Department of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. And I'm here as a junior Fulbright visiting scholar at the School of Public Health. I'll be here during this fall semester, so from August to December. And my talk today to you is entitled Brazilian Dam Risk Assessment, Ecotoxicology, Guides Decision-Making and Community Awareness in the Face of Disasters. So, okay. So I'll be talking a little bit about my background at first, and then I'll be contextualizing the dam failures, the two major failures which happened in the past 7 years, and telling you some stories about people who were affected by these failures also, and what has been done since they occurred. And then contrasting major disasters, post-disaster management, how it has been done for each of them. And a project that I'm part of, which is Projeto Brumadinho, UFMG, which is for the latest dam rupture. And then ecotoxicology as a decision-making tool, and then some final remarks. So this is my background, a timeline for my journey as an academic. So I have a bachelor in biological sciences from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, which is where I teach right now. But in 2012, 10 years ago, I was applied for a Brazilian governmental program, which was called Science Without Borders, to come to the US as an undergraduate for a year. And then the University of Minnesota picked me. I was in my early 20s and I was like, I don't want to go to Minnesota. I want to go to California, you know? But then my mom, she's a botanist and she was a professor at the Catholic University for 40 years. And she had a colleague who did his PhD here at the University of Minnesota with Professor Jim Perry. So before I came here, I contacted Professor Jim Perry, and then I made sure I was registered in all of his classes, graduate level and undergraduate level as well. So that's how I met him. And that's how nowadays I'm very thankful I came here because it's the land of 1,000 lakes. And then I got introduced to many like water quality and water management topics that I now work with. So I think it was supposed to be this way. And then I went back to Brazil and I did my master's in the graduate program in sanitation, environmental sciences, and water resources. I worked with the treatment of textile wastewater by advanced oxidation processes for water reuse in the textile industry. Right after I finished my master, I just kept going with my PhD. This time, I worked with contaminants of emerging concern in water and wastewater, and also their removal and toxicity from these two matrices. And during my PhD, I had the chance of doing a mobility through Erasmus in France. So I spent 6 months there. And right before I finished my PhD, there was a position opened for a professor in the Department of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering at UFMG. And then I applied and I passed. So I just became a professor right away. So I'm an adjunct professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais since 2019. And then 2021, we were all teaching online and bored. And I saw the Fulbright call and I was like, maybe I'll go back to Minnesota. And then I wrote to Professor Jim Perry and he was like, well, I'll be in a sabbatical, so I cannot host you, but I can introduce you to some people. What project would you like to propose? And then he introduced me to Professor Matt Simsik from the School of Public Health. And also Dr. Jared Ankley from the EPA. So I proposed a project related to the occurrence and risks associated to PFAS in an urban lake in my town in Brazil. So I'll be going to the EPA in Duluth for training also. So I'll be here until December. So a little bit about the university in Brazil. So we are here in Minnesota. This is the state of Minas Gerais, where my university is. It's a little lighter there in the map. This is my town. So you can see it's surrounded by mountains. These mountains have lots of mines, gold and iron. It has been explored historically since colonial times. This is campus. So all this is our campus at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. Whenever we talk about Belo Horizonte, which is the city, the name actually means beautiful horizon because of these mountains. No one knows where it is. People only know Rio and São Paulo in Brazil. But whenever I say, it's the soccer stadium where Brazil lost 7-1 to Germany in the World Cup, people will know where it is. So that's what we are famous for. But we actually have lots of good food and hospitality as well. So the Federal University of Minas Gerais was founded in September 7th, 1927. Our community is formed by 72,000 people, so pretty much the size of the University of Minnesota. We have 77 undergrad courses, 8 graduate programs, and 900 research centers. This is the School of Engineering where I'm based. So this building right here. My room is actually right here. The School of Engineering was actually founded before the university. So in 1911, we have 11 engineering courses and 60 research domains. The Department of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering is my department. So these are all mango trees. So you have to be careful where you park in the summer because mangoes will fall in your car. But then these are where students have classes, and then here we have laboratories as well. But for the Department of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering, we are a reference in sanitation and environmental sciences in Brazil and Latin America. So we have 21 professors and 9 laboratories. We actually have a training center for sanitation, which is inside the wastewater treatment plant. So master's and PhD students can perform their projects and their research with real wastewater that's getting to the wastewater treatment plant, which is really nice. And I think it's one of the reasons why we became a reference in sanitation in the country. And so along with the Department of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering, the Department of Hydraulics and Water Resources, we formed the graduate program in Sanitation, Environment, and Water Resources, which is the program from which I got my master's and my PhD. And now I supervise students in this program too. We have maximum score in the Brazilian research evaluation systems. This is done every 3 years, and we just got reevaluated, and we were able to keep the maximum score. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to the website. There are 10 research lines and 5 research groups. So this is my background, and now you know my relationship to the University of Minnesota and why I'm here today. But when these dam failures I'm talking about today happen within this timeline. So the first one, the first major one within this past 7 years occurred in 2015. At the time, I was a master's student, so I began my master's in 2014. And in the day it happened, we were actually carrying out a congress for advanced oxidation processes treatment in my university in Brazil. So my supervisor was the president of the congress, and I was the simultaneous translator. So I was locked in a room listening to all these keynote speakers speaking in English, and I would have to translate it to Portuguese. So the day passed, and I didn't hear anything about the dam failure. When the Congress was over that day, I just met my friends, and they were like, you know, the dam rupture. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then we got to the hotel room because we wanted to stay like near the university. It was an international conference, so we wanted to make sure we would get there on time every day. So I was not in my house. I was at the hotel. We turned on the TV and we just saw all these images from this dam failure. So this had a really high impact on me. Like I was a student in environmental sciences field, and I felt like I could do nothing about it. So it was a huge rupture. We're gonna talk about it a little more later today. And then the second one happened. It was like 5 days before my process to become a professor at the university. So it was January 25th. The tests started on February 4th. And then I became a professor in May, but I got the results like a week after the dam rupture. And actually in the written test, we had to like build a management plan for post-disaster management. So when I became a professor at the Department of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering, actually my role in the department was to implement ecotoxicological assays as tools for environmental monitoring and impact assessment. So it was because of my role in ecotoxicology and also through Projeto Brumadinho, UFMG, which is a project I'm going to talk about later today, in which I'm using ecotoxicology to measure the impacts of this dam rupture. I think so because of ecotoxicology and through Projeto Brumadinho, I'm being able to do something. I believe it's one of the most important duties I have as a professor in a federal university in Brazil, which is to serve the community and give them answers, especially the most vulnerable ones which were affected by this disaster. So they want to know what were the impacts. Can they use the water? Can they swim in the water? Has the water been, how healthy is it for fish and for other organisms? So keep this name in your mind, Projeto Brumadinho. We're going to talk about it later today again. So dam failures, why are they happening in Brazil? So mining represents 4% of Brazilian gross domestic product. For my state, Minas Gerais, actually Minas means mining, and then Gerais is general, so general mining. There's lots of mining there. Our gold was gone in the 19th century because Portugal just took it all to them. There's some still, but only a little. But it represents 30% of our state gross domestic product. Iron mining, 72.2% of the total mining sector revenues in Brazil in 2021. So both of the stems were from iron ore mining, those which failed. So that's why I'm talking about iron mining here. And in my state, in general, okay, we have 3,399 mines. And then when it comes to iron ore, what happens is 1 ton of iron ore generates 0.4 tons of tailings, which is the waste that is generated. So 40% goes to waste, okay? And this is nowadays. In the 70s, one of the dams is from the 70s. It was even, the technology was not as high as we have today, so it was even more. So what are these tailings? They're mixtures of crushed rocks, processing fluids from mills, washeries, and concentrators. It has some minerals as well, but what is done with them once they are once the iron ore is extracted is they are deposited in dams. So it is still a challenge to manage this tailings. Nowadays, around the world, we have more than 48,000 million cubic meters of tailings stored in dams around the world. So, and in Brazil, since it's a big part, in my state, also a big part of our revenues, we have many of these dams in our lands. So, historically, there are 366 dam collapses. There were incidents worldwide from 1915 to 2020, and these have caused almost 3,000 human deaths. And the ones which have heights up to 50 meters corresponds to 80% of the total number of collapses. And both dams which failed in Brazil were more than 80 meters tall. Okay. And then from the 885 dams registered in Brazil, 81% are at high risk, 40% in Minas Gerais. So we have 38 dams in high risk of rupture in my state, and 6 out of 10 major dam failures in Brazil occurred in my state. And then we're talking about the last 2 ones today, which are the tailing Fundão Dam failure. So this is the Doce River basin. So these are the watersheds in my state. So this is the Doce River basin. And then an image, you can see that the river is very brown. So this was after the dam ruptured, and tailings went 600 kilometers all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So satellite images were able to capture that. And then the other one was at Paraupeba River Basin. And we're not sure yet how long tailings have been transported, but this one, the mining company restaurant was right downstream the dam, and it was lunchtime. So there were almost 300 deaths. So it was a very hazardous, like human and social impact. So talking about Fundão Dam failure, the one that ruptured in 2015 when I was still a master's student, it occurred on November 5th, 2015. This dam was only in operation for 7 years, so it's not like it was an old dam and it was constructed without technology. And then there were 45 million cubic meters of tailings released into Gualacho do Norte River. 55 kilometers later, they reached Rio do Carmo. 22 kilometers later, they reached the Doce River, which is the basin I showed you. And on November 21st, so 16 days after the rupture, they had been transported throughout 600 kilometers all the way to the Atlantic Ocean.
In the Google image next to you, is that gray part just clouds, or is that like,
it's
like in the bottom left part? Is that just clouds?
Yeah, it's clouds.
I wasn't sure if that was like a result, like some kind of
flow. No.
Okay.
Yeah, well, this was taken in the rainy season, so we have lots of clouds. So this is an image of when it got to the Atlantic Ocean. So, I mean, we can't even imagine like how much it is. This map shows where the dam was. I apologize, it's in Portuguese, but it's because it shows all the towns along the way. And the first town downstream the dam was located 22.8 kilometers downstream. And this is a town which is called Bento Rodrigues. It was founded in the 17th century because of mining exploration. Like actually my state, people were only in the coast, but then they started going inside the country to look for resources, and mining was one of them. So that's how my state was founded. And this is the story of the city as well. And then the city was hit by tailings within hours of the rupture. It had 200 households and 612 inhabitants in 2015 when the dam failed. And most of the 19 victims, so for this one, we had 19 deaths as a consequence, were either working on the dam or inhabitants of this town. We actually have a very deep story about Paula, who was this dam was operated by Samarco, which is the name of the company, but Vale and BHP had I think 30% of the company also. And this lady, Paula, she worked at the dam and she lived in Bento Rodrigues. And her kids were at school and she knew it was gonna hit the city. And she had a motorcycle and she didn't think twice, she just got in her motorcycle and she went down like a trail. She knew she was gonna get there faster. And then she went down, she got there, she started honking, the dam failed, the dam failed. And then people went out and she knew the route to the tallest part of the town. And she went to the school and she saved 400 people in town just because of her. All these people didn't die. So for me, she's an example of bravery and courage. And some people, like old people mostly, who have some difficulty of walking or just didn't believe, they just thought it was water and it was going to go up and then it was going to go down and everything would be okay. So they refused to leave their houses. So this is one of the reasons why some people from there also died. And some people just lost everything they had achieved throughout their whole lives. Some of them contradictorily working as Samarco employees. So there's a book that was written by a journalist in Brazil who was the first one to be in a helicopter after this happened. So she talks about all the victims and stories of people who lost everything. And then there is this guy who worked his whole life as a Samarco employee. And in the 1990s, we had a president in Brazil. The country was broke and he got money from everyone who had savings account. So he promised himself, I'm never gonna put money in my savings account anymore. What did he do with his money? He put it in an envelope inside his wardrobe. When the dam failed, he could never find it. And there are some cases that we just listened to, like after the dam failed, people just, and the tailings had passed. Some people went there to rob things that they could find in their houses. And when I hear that, I cannot believe how bad a human being can be. But, it's just a personal thought. And then, so these are some of the images from Bento Rodrigues. So some of the impacts associated to this dam rupture. So social impacts, 19 deaths, isolation of inhabited areas, destruction of homes and urban structure leading to homeless communities, insecurity and fear. Many people were anxious. They didn't know what was going to happen. Like all these people from Bento Rodrigues, what was going to happen with them? They were homeless. They lost their jobs. The schools, the kids had no schools. So it caused a lot of anxiety. Interruptions of water supply systems to millions of people. The biggest city in the watershed is Governador Valadares. It has 500,000 inhabitants, and they were all lacking water supply because the water came from the river, and we didn't know if it was safe to use this water for water supply at the moment. Fishing activities were banned, and there is a community which relies on fishing in this watershed. Economic impacts, fishing restrictions leading to economic issues, limitations for hydroelectric power production. So I didn't mention it, but I can mention right now. So this is a dam for hydroelectric power production. So some of the tailings, they were retained in this dam, which was downstream of Bento Rodrigues. And then this led to a few problems associated to energy production. Interruption to water supply systems and impacts on livestock and farming activities when some of the land was actually hit by water and tailings as well. And then environmental problems, a huge list, right? I think we can not even measure all of them yet. So 1,500 hectares destroyed, habitat loss and fragmentation, destruction of permanent preservation areas, many springs, water springs were destroyed, death of domestic and wild animals, decimation of wild aquatic fauna, changes in water quality and quantity, and some people after the dam rupture, they started noticing allergies, and there were some blood tests taken, and they realized arsenic was high in some people's blood, but there was not that much of a high concentration of arsenic in the tailings. So the most accepted theory is that what was deposited in the sediments of the river actually went to the liquid phase as the tailings came down. So this was in the water, and then people were starting to get that in their blood because of that. So scientists in Brazil and around the world use their tools to try to measure the impact of this dam failure. So this is the work which was performed with remote sensing. As the tailings are solids, turbidity is an optical water quality parameter, so it reflects radiation in certain wavelengths. So we could see the tailings traveling along the river, and so he modeled that, and he was able to conclude that since it was the rainy season, it rained on the day the rupture occurred, but also like sequentially every other day. And then every time a rain event occurred, turbidity went up again. So there were subsequent rainfall events causing continued washout of high turbidity plumes. And then this actually also happened at getting all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And then high turbidity plume reached 11 kilometers off the coast. Moderate turbidity plume reached 39 kilometers off the coast, and low turbidity plume reached 75 kilometers off the coast. So he was able to measure that using satellite remote sensing models with turbidity, in situ turbidity measures. Fernandez and his collaborators, he was actually my professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. They published this paper, Deep into the Mud, Ecological and Socioeconomic Impacts of the Dam Breach in Minas Gerais, Brazil. So impacts to landscapes and habitats. So satellite images showed loss of vegetation and deposition of iron-rich tailings along the river from 0 to 950 meters of altitude, and potential extent and magnitude and reversibility of these impacts to pelagic habitats, coral reefs, and mangroves in the coast are unknown. Like there's no way to measure how much impact these tailings had in to these areas. Loss of ecological memory. So when these tailings deposit in the sediments, we just lose everything that was there historically. It changes how it was before, and it's a way for us to know the historical ecological function of this environment. And natural floodplain regeneration may be delayed or impeded entirely. Regarding impacts on aquatic fauna, if we think about it, all these solids going into a river, first, turbidity goes up. Producers are not able to do photosynthesis, right? First consumers, some of them are rely on filtration. They just clog, they cannot eat, so they die immediately as an acute effect. And the same happens to fish because their gills are clogged with the solids, and they just die immediately also. And benthic fauna, they're just, they cannot go anywhere anymore, so they die immediately too. So these are some of the acute effects we can measure, but chronic effects in a long term, bioaccumulation, we don't know. We cannot measure it yet, right? So Fernandes and collaborators, he mentions that fish richness in the Doce River, it had more than 100 species, which is like half of the whole United Kingdom diversity in freshwater fish. Many species were still unknown, so maybe we're never gonna get to know them because they are not registered yet. And 6 of them were at known risk of extinction when the dam failed. Impacts to fish community, it was a very concerning problem because they are one of the major components of the Doce River, and local communities relied on this fish, and entire fish populations just died immediately after the disaster because their gills were clogged, they could not breathe, and then they just died. There are, in this article, they mention like because it took 16 days for the tailings to reach the ocean. So if you observed like the tailings going downstream, you could see just fish trying to jump out of the water as if they wanted to run somewhere. High frequency of cryptid species in the Doce River. So it's hard to measure the impact on diversity as there are many unknown species. But it's important to mention also that the resilience of the river was already threatened, of course, in a lower level by other activities. So along the 600 kilometers, for example, only one city treated sewage. All the others just discharged raw sewage into the river. So a parenthesis, Brazil we can only treat 50% of the wastewater in Brazil still. So this is a reality for us, okay? When it comes to socioeconomic impacts and human health risks, over $20 billion equivalent of material and environmental losses. But then I ask you, is it really possible to measure that? What is the value of environmental losses? For me, it's one thing. For a fisherman who just raised his whole family fishing at the Doce River, it's much more valuable than for me, right? So it's really hard to measure and to quantify that. Interruption of mining activities impacted 37 cities because, all of the cities relying on mining, and then this happened, and we had to stop a few operations. And this actually led to a social impact, which is something we would never predict. So all the kids who were saved in the Bento Rodrigues city because of Paula and her motorcycle all these families were transferred to Mariana, which is a small town near where the dam was. And the kids just started studying in the school in Mariana, but they were bullied because the kids there were like, my dad lost his job because of what happened in your town. So they had to build a school only for kids from Bento Rodrigues, so they would not suffer social bullying. And then biomagnification across trophic levels can persist for decades and cause damage not only to biota, but also to population over the years because we eat fish. Impacts will persist as water currents dissipate and continue to make tailings constituents available to aquatic fauna. Fish and agricultural use, it was banned for indefinite time after the disaster. So, I mean, it's really important to plan before future use to avoid risks. And when you think about, we have to act quickly because all these people are being, they are homeless, they don't have access to their economic activity, but it's important to have integrated planning to also prevent unintended and further consequences. And then I have two examples here. So the city of Governador Valadares, the one which has more than 500,000 inhabitants, people just don't trust the water supply system anymore. So they started drilling wells for groundwater. So the bad water level is down in 60%, and the number of wells has increased by 40%. And then there is a lake which was a very famous touristic lake by the Doce River. And what happened was, so the river is here and this lake was right here. And so when the rupture occurred, the federal prosecutor who was judging the case, the tailings were not there in this region yet. He said, you must interrupt tailings to get in the lake. So they made physical barriers so that tailings will not go in. Well, there are some houses over here. There is sewage. It eutrophies. So they had to take tons of macrophytes from there afterwards. So they act quickly so the tailings wouldn't go in, but at the same time, another impact occurred to the lake. So it's important to plan the post-disaster actions carefully instead of only responding quickly. So this is the story of Fundão Dam failure, which happened in 2015. Regarding Brumadinho Dam failure, the one in 2019, it occurred in January 25th, 2019. So this dam, in contrast to the other one, which was only 7 years old, it was more than 70 years old. So it was built in 1974 and inactivated in 2016. So it was not in operation anymore, okay? So the other one was in operation, but this one was already inactivated. So they were just maintaining it. For this one, 10 million cubic meters of tailings were released in Córrego Ferro Carvão. 7.8 million cubic meters were retained 7 kilometers downstream. So the other 2.2, right? They went further downstream, but there's no consensus yet how further they went. The Environment Water Agency in our state, it estimates they went 25 kilometers downstream all the way to hydroelectric as reservoir that we have downstream the dam as well. So this pattern repeats, right? So we have a dam, a mining dam, and then we have a hydroelectric dam because there are two hydroelectric power represents 70% of total electric energy in Brazil. So, and mining is also a very important activity. So we're gonna have this pattern repeating very frequently. If you look at the pictures, this was the dam, and then you can see the slope failure point of initiation, and then this caused the toe to move, and then the whole dam collapsed in seconds. And as I told you, Vale, so the other one was Samarco with Vale and BHP as partners as well. This one was a Vale dam. So the same company that was involved in the other one. So the restaurant was downstream and many people died. This is the image. So here you can see where the tailings were deposited. And you can see that reforestation was going on already because it was inactivated. In this image, what is interesting to notice is you have the darker areas. This is all tailings because it has lots of iron. And then you can see the difference between soil and tailings. If you go there today, you're going to see the same thing because they're still removing tailings from the area. And they're still looking for 5 people who are disappeared or pieces of their bodies. That's what actually they are looking for right now. So they estimate it's going to take them until 2035 to finish removing all of it and looking for these victims, which who are still disappeared. So for this one, social impacts, 265 deaths, 5 still disappeared. So firemen are working 24/7. They have this treadmill, and then the pieces of tailings go and they watch in a screen, and then they keep looking for pieces of these victims. Compromised public water supply, unemployment, indigenous territories of these 2 indigenous groups were affected. Local population compromised by physical and mental illnesses, just as the other one. Economic, compromised public water supply. So you have many activities that need water, which also had to stop. 17 municipalities impacted by rupture, banning on fishing activities, just as the other one. Compromised tourism activities. We have a very, I think it's the largest open museum in the world in the city. So the museum had to close its doors. So tourism was a big activity for the town. The town's name is Brumadinho. That's why it's called Project Brumadinho UMN. Destroyed livestock production sites and agricultural fields, and the drastic modification of land occupation. And for environmental impacts, 133 hectares of Atlantic forest vegetation was destroyed. Atlantic forest is a type of forest we have in Brazil, which is almost all gone. I think we only have less than 5% of this. So it's, you know, we try to protect it, and then it's been destroyed by this failure. And the other one also. So destroyed 70 hectares of riparian areas, habitat fragmentation and fauna decimation. Some metals trespassed environmental standards. Turbidity reached 3,000 NTUs 5 days after the dam rupture. So if you look at drinking water, it's like 0.1 NTU. A river, it may have like, I don't know, 20 when it's raining, but it reached 3,000. And water and sediment toxicity was observed for a few indicator or test organisms we use in toxicity tests. So going the same way as I did with the other one, satellite images were able to estimate how much we lost. So before rupture, 84% of the area was occupied by forest. And then after rupture, this area decreased to 69%. Most part of the area was covered by water, and 15% just turned into degraded area. And this degraded area was mainly the area that was fertile. So agricultural production also went down in the region because of that. And 1.7 kilometers squared of forest was lost by as it was covered by water. And tailings dryness, it forms a thick layer which hinders agricultural practice. So not only the fertile regions were covered, but the other ones that could be used were actually also damaged by the deposition of tailings. So if you look here in this table, they show before rupture and after rupture, and then you have forest degradation, bare soil and water. And you can see that forest went from 2.04 kilometers squared to 0.3. And then the area covered by water, 0.05 to 1.3. So it's a significant change for a watershed. In this one, they looked at 7 water sampling points along the watershed. One of them is a reference point, so it's upstream the dam, the former dam actually, and then all the other ones are downstream the dam. And then they did chemical analysis to see what were the metals mainly present in all these regions. And also ecotoxicology and bioaccumulation assays to see if there was any impact of the dam failure in these sampling points in the water and aquatic fauna. So they found that tailings were formed by particulate material containing mainly this elements. So iron, aluminum, and manganese are the most prominent in tailings, but we also can see rare earth elements in the tailings going up associated to tailings and also points downstream the place where rupture occurred. Water, for water, some metals were above the water quality standards after rupture. Sediments, we have no guidelines, standards for sediments in Brazil, but some metals were actually above international guidelines. And for toxicological assays, water and sediment samples were toxic to different trophic levels, so algae, crustacean, and fish. And fish exposed to water and sediments accumulated metals in muscle tissue. So they got the tailings and sediment, they took to the laboratory and they kept in the fishing tanks in contact with the samples. And they were able to see that these were accumulating in their muscles. So here is a table where they show each of the metals. And then this is the point upstream the dam. And then this is where the dam, this is actually tailings that were analyzed, and then downstream the dam. So 5 kilometers downstream, 48, 111, 240, and 302. And then other metals and the same repeat. So the darker it is, the higher the increase for these elements, okay? So metals enrichment for all of these metals that are listed there, higher enrichment factors in both tailings and sampling sites. So we can associate the occurrence of these metals to the event along the river basin. Toxic effects, so the algae Rhaphidoceles subtractata, which is a test organism, a standard toxicity test, which can measure chronic toxicity. So toxicity seen in the long term along the life cycle of this algae. So this was the most sensitive organism to samples collected at Paraopeba River 5 days after the rupture. And it showed that all sampling points were toxic, not only right downstream dam rupture. For crustacean, Daphnia magna was used as a test organism, and only the sample corresponding to the point immediately downstream the dam was toxic. So showing that toxicity was actually detected for 2 trophic levels for this sample. So showing an effect of the tailings. For fish, Daniel the zebrafish, famous zebrafish, was used as a test organism, but it had no acute effect. So in this case, it's death. So no fish died after being exposed to water, but there was 20% mortality when they were exposed to sediments. So there is exchange of toxic elements from water to sediments deposited in the river. And regarding metal accumulation in fish after exposure to water and sediment sampled at the river, for both matrices, we had the same level of accumulation of metal in most muscle tissue, especially iron, aluminum, and manganese, because they were so present in the tailings that dissolved levels were actually high in water also. And so they accumulated. And for manganese, it's interesting because although we think it's not toxic, it has some neurotoxic issues. And we have, I think internationally, we should rethink the standards for this element. And the exposure peak, so the peak of accumulation in these tissues, in the muscle tissue, was actually observed for the sample immediately downstream the dam, so showing that it has a higher effect than all the other sampling points. So when we compare both of these disasters, I thought I had talked for 20 minutes. Sorry, guys. Some similarities, I'm almost done, I think, but I don't know if you have to go, it will be recorded. They are similar tailings. They were extracted in the same region. And so soil is similar and the same mining type. So they have the same constituents. High content of hematite in both tailings. And this makes the material more stiff and more dense, so more likely to occur the rupture. Mud placed where only sand should have been placed in both dams. So there were some failures for dam construction. High and steep slopes, so both of them were higher than 80 meters. And they both use upstream construction. What is this? So you have your first barrier to the tailings which are being deposited, and for upstream construction, you just add the next layer upstream the older one, and then you keep adding tailings, you keep adding your barrier upstream. So flow would go this way. It is the barriers are built upstream of one another, whereas downstream construction, you have your initial one here, and then you just build downstream the flow. This one is more safe than this one, okay? But both dams were actually upstream construction. Both of them had deviations from original projects. Both of them were classified as high associated potential damage, yet low risk according to the way Brazilian legislation classifies dams. Problems with drainage systems in both of them, and both disasters occurred in the rainy season. So this might have been one of the reasons they occurred actually. So for the Brumadinho Dam, it was no longer under operation after 40 years, whereas for the other one, it was only active for 7 years. So it's not an age issue. Brumadinho Dam failure, the one which had the highest number of people killed, occurred after no signs of distress before failure. In contrast, the other one had several signs of distress. And for the one in 2015, Small seismic activities were recorded, but they might not be the reason why the dam failed. So they have been registered, but we are not sure if they played a role in the rupture or not. And so what happened after the dam failure and for repair? So for the one in 2015, the Fundão Dam failure, which reached the Atlantic Ocean, 22 people were found responsible for the disaster. 21 of 22 were accused of murder. The federal prosecutor reported that measures to prevent the disaster were lacking. And so the mining company, they made a deal, an agreement with the public ministry, and through which they founded a non-profit foundation to repair damage. So this is the second richest non-profit foundation in the world now, only behind the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's called Fundação Renova, and it has already spent in 42 programs, 24 billion reais. And so half of it, a little more than half of it, with people and community. So all these people are having their, they are receiving like salaries from these companies. And then managing programs. And then this is the slice of earth and water. And then infrastructure and construction. So this is how they are repairing the damage for this one. What are they doing to tailings deposited along 600 kilometers of river? It's impossible to remove, and maybe removing, you have more impacts, right? So they're using nature-based solutions. So they are monitoring, there's lots of data, and they're also using nature-based solutions for that. For the Brumadinho project, after seeing this foundation with lots of money and many people and things taking time to happen, what was done with a judicial process was opened, and a project entitled Evaluation of Post-Disaster Actions was created. Through this process, a contract was made between my university and the public ministry, who said, you should donate 50 million, I think that was the amount, I'm not sure if it's the exact amount, 50 million reais to the university, and we're gonna build a project, which is Projeto Brumadinho UFMG, to assess environmental, economic, and social impacts of the dam rupture. And then based on results we are building, the judge will make a decision on who is guilty, who is not, and then repair damage according to researchers and university professors who are committed to that. Of course, some of the professors were already involved in research projects with the mining company, so they were not able to apply for this call. So you had to sign a term saying that you were not involved with a mining company before this project. So 61 calls were built inside UFMG with researchers from different areas, so environmental, socioeconomics, population health, and infrastructure. And that's based on that, there will be a final report, and the judge will make his decision. In the environmental sciences side, that's where I come in. We have water and soil, and then there is a project with ecotoxicology. So actually two. So I'm involved in two of the 61 projects, which goal is to assess acute and chronic toxicity of surface waters and sediments from the Paraopeba River in regions affected by the dam rupture. So this is with the water, it's sub-project 15, and for sediments, sub-project 20. This is our team, so it's not only me. I have collaborators, participants, researchers in this project who are my colleagues from vet school. Professor Jucinea, she's doing the zebrafish tests, And then Professor Kleber he's doing the seriodaphnea tests. Professor Carlos is doing in vitro tests for mutagenicity and genotoxicity. And Professor Camila, who was originally in our project, she's now she's watching us right now, so she's gonna laugh if I say that. But she's now the big boss. She's in the scientific committee, so she's supervising some of these 61 sub-projects. And then we are working on our final reports right now. And then they're gonna get all the 61 projects, they're gonna turn it into one report, and then the judge will make his decision based on this one final report made by this scientific committee. It's a great challenge. So I will go a little faster right now because I'm sure you have heard about ecotoxicology before. So ecotoxicology is a branch of toxicology which helps us measure the ecological status of a certain either water or sediments. And this enables us to measure either acute toxicity, which is something that happens instantaneously after the event or after a pollutant is an organism is exposed to a pollutant. This test usually evaluates death of these organisms. When it comes to chronic toxicity, it's something that will happen along the life cycle of the test organism due to repeated exposures to lower concentrations. So we usually make an analogy, we say acute toxicity is like a heart attack. The person has it and he or she dies immediately. While chronic toxicity is a cancer, you're exposed to something throughout your life, and then you just develop something that is sublethal, but it may be lethal at some point. And so this has been used to test the effect of tailings by many different studies, and there are standards tests used by the EPA, by the OECD, and also Brazilian technical, the ISO standards. So some advantages and limitations, like every methodology, ecotoxicology also has. So it complements information provided by physical chemical parameters. You can assess the ecological status of environmental samples. It enables quantification of the effect of single substance or pollutants. And it's cheaper when compared to chemical analysis, but at the same time, some conditions are pre-established. So if I have the environmental sample I take to the lab, I want to make sure the fish is dying because of something that it is in my sample, not because there is lack of dissolved oxygen. So I have to keep the dissolved oxygen level at a certain range, while in the environment, this is not going to happen. So you cannot reproduce 100% of what's happening in the environment in the laboratory. Also in the laboratory, the fish is there in the tank, he's exposed 100% of time to that sample, while in the environment, this may not happen. You have different currents, different flows. So maybe it's overestimated a little bit. And then standard test species may not be native to that environment. So they might not translate to what is really happening to native species. Some of the answers we can get using ecotoxicology as a decision-making tool. What is the ecological status of the Paraopeba River watershed, which was affected by the dam rupture? Has ecosystem integrity been affected by the event? So if any of the trophic levels are being impacted, we might have an impact in the ecosystem, right? Is there any recurrence of acute toxicity in the rainy season? So since this tailings deposit in the sediments, we think maybe in the rainy season when there's higher flow, they go back to the liquid phase and then they are more available to aquatic fauna. So maybe every rainy season we have recurrence of acute toxicity. Are there any of the water uses threatening? For example, both of these rivers are class 2 rivers in our legislation, and they must be used for aquatic life protection. So if there are toxic effects, this is one of the uses that is threatened. Is there compliance with the legislation? our state legislation says class 2 rivers should not have acute nor chronic toxicity. So if there is toxicity, there is no compliance with the legislation. Is the ecological status responding to post-disaster measures? So if we keep measuring while they're doing construction and infrastructure measurements to retain tailings and not having them discharged in the river anymore, is toxicity responding to that? So we have not finished yet, but we have finished all sampling. 12 sampling sites along the watershed, 3 of them upstream the dam as reference points and all the other ones downstream. We did 4 sampling campaigns for water, 2 in the rainy season, 2 in the dry season. And for sediments, only 2 sampling campaigns, 1 in the dry season and 1 in the sediment season. And these are some of the pictures of our sampling, one of our sampling locations. And then we're doing all of these toxicity tests. So acute toxicity with a luminescent bacteria, acute toxicity with zebrafish, chronic toxicity with crustacean, chronic toxicity with algae, acute and chronic toxicity with the larva of zebrafish. So we can see how different stages of the same organisms are responding to environmental samples, mutagenicity and genotoxicity as in vitro tests. And for sediments, we're doing Hylela, Azteca, and the mutagenicity test. We have now finished all samples and tests, but I cannot tell you what the results are because they are protected by law. So once we turn in the final report, the judge makes a decision, we might be able to publish this result. So you're gonna hear about them for sure. But unfortunately, I cannot tell them today right now. And what has been done after these failures according to legislation and mining them. So before the first one ruptured, we actually had a mining dam and emergency action plan required for all dams. But then after the first one ruptured, they were more strict with that. And they said, you know, you have to have an integrated safety management system for mining dams. Periodicity was established for execution or update, a dam safety plan. This all started to be required for all dams. And then still, there was the second rupture. And then after that, in 2019, they prohibited the construction of upstream dams. But as you saw, this one was inactivated. It was not being constructed. It was not in operation, but it failed. So we still have lots of upstream dams, inactivated ones in our state at risk of failing also. Defined need for installation of automated dam instrumentation for real-time and full-time monitoring. And it prohibited maintaining mining facilities downstream the dam. So the restaurant was there downstream. So now this cannot be done anymore. So they are having to change these locations. But there's still hundreds of upstream dams in operation or inactivated. So new ones are not being built because it's not allowed anymore, but we have old ones in operation. There are only 35 dam inspectors for more than 800 dams in Brazil. So not enough. And mining still represents a thick slice of Minas Gerais state revenue, and tailings continue to be deposited onto our land. So it's probably like more question, what is the next one that is going to be failing in the next few days? So I apologize for talking too much. And I would like to thank the Fulbright program for the fact that I'm here right now, the University of Minnesota, you guys from the Conservation Biology program, and Professor Jim Perry, who actually is the responsible for me being here right now in my university. And I open for questions.
You probably need to run.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't think it was going to take that long.
One quick question. I assume these dams, the 2 dams that we talked about, were constructed explicitly for containing mining tailings. They were not pre-existing dams. right?
No, yeah,
But they are on the river, on the stream, right? No.
no, but then when they rupture, it just flows in the river.
So there isn't this
There isn't necessarily a flow.
through the dam.
Yeah,
it's-
no, yeah. And what they do sometimes in this constructions is they use detailings themselves to make those barriers. So they mix it with other materials. And this material is like, you cannot really predict their mechanical and other properties. So it's not very safe to do it as they are doing, but they use their own tailings to do the barriers and build the dam actually.
Thinking preventively, is there any other way to kind of get rid of tailings other than digging?
Yeah, so there are, dry methods, but they say it's very expensive. And what is expensive when you have all this environmental and social damage? But for them, it's still like it. I mean, I would say they probably do the math. It's like when you're constructing a bridge, if you take into account 200-year floods, you would have to build it like very high up, but then it's not economically feasible. So you just take the risk and you build a lower bridge, So they say it's not, there's no cost benefit of doing the dry one, although in other countries it's required, like for example, in Canada, I think Valley has some operations there, they have to do the dry method. So it's a case of, prioritizing, I think, and, maybe they're gonna look back at some point and say, if we had invested in this technology, we would have less costs. Only thinking economically, but social and environmental, it's actually impossible to measure what was the cost.
Are they like, would they be considering it maybe for like dam removal of upstream dams right now?
Yeah, so there's lots. So if you go to Brazil right now as a biologist or environmental engineer, you're not going to be employed. Especially in my state, everyone is working for consulting companies in these projects. They are, how do I say that? They are inactivating many dams that were in operation. And so they're in this part of the project. They're investing in it.
My understanding that when this, I believe it was when the last dam ruptured, that this company is the same as the one being proposed up in northern Minnesota. Can you speak to that at all?
I don't think it is. I've asked a few people already and they all said different names, or it's not the same name as this one.
Okay,
I don't know if they're involved in some way, like a small percentage,
right.
but I don't think it's the same.
Yeah, I've gotten lost in that too, because I've heard people say it's like maybe the same parent company, like not so
Yeah.
much, but it hasn't been clear to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll check it out. To see if I can- But I did hear about it.
Great job.
Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing the story.
Thank you
with
for
us.
having me.
Really fascinating, interesting story. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice